it's done. My first and probably only DIY deck build is completed. This video is about things that went well that I would want to do again, and some things I'd do differently or that maybe didn't do so well. As you can tell, this thing's built on a slope. It's also tied, I don't know if you can see it, into an existing deck, which added another layer of complexity. So I'll go through the things that went really well, why, and again, things I'll do differently. So buckle in. I hope this really gives you some value if you're thinking about building a deck. I learned some sometimes tough lessons, and hopefully maybe save you a little bit of work. And frankly, there were some pieces that just intimidated me, and I just delayed. And for whatever reason, the most intimidating and scariest was the stairs, the railings, and the concrete. One decision I'm glad I made was that I didn't hire a subcontractor. Could have, it would have been easier, it would have been faster, more expensive, but the job would have been done in maybe a week or 2 weeks. But I got some quotes, and I also got prices on lumber, and there was a massive spread. And I thought, I've got the advantage of time, so I can do this myself, and that's what I did. The end result, I think, is just as good. Nothing against carpenters. They're great. They're amazing people. And I felt real intimidated not knowing how to cut a board the right way sometimes. But when you're building for yourself, that's a whole different thing. I did get a permit. I think a permit's really important. The codes that they use are just to make sure the thing is built right, built to what's needed in the local area. For example, whatever code is in Southern California, where they have earthquakes, is probably a lot different than the code here in the Midwest and the Ozarks where I live. Another thing was getting a draftsman. Now, I drew it out by hand myself, and then I hired a professional draftsman to draw it and notate what size boards to use here and there, what the spacing had to be, what the various code rules were. So he designed the deck to fit my local code. And I followed that, and that was my Bible. Between the draftsman's notes and the city code, I was able to build a really stable deck. And frankly, I exceeded code in a number of areas. Like, for example, the joists can be on 16-inch centers, and mine are on 12. And they're a size larger than they need to be. And frankly, standing on my deck is like standing on the ground. It's really nice and solid. Some other reasons I wanted a draftsman was because I'm building on a hill. I cantilevered the deck in order to save a tree, and I was tying into an existing deck that you can see back here. And those are some real complexities. And I know there are some really good off-the-shelf decks that you can buy, but they're standard size, and if you're building on flat ground in nice dirt, that may be a good way to go. But I had too many one-off things here to even attempt to use one of those. All the lumber in my build was ground contact lumber, including the joists, which should never touch the ground, which will help it last more years. And a couple other things that I did to extend the life of the deck was that I used joist tape across the top, and I'll have pictures here, there, and everywhere, that helps keep those joists dry. And I also sealed the ends of all the major boards, which, as you know, would wicks in. So by sealing those ends, that'll keep those boards from rotting anytime soon. So that should add years to the life of the deck. I also hid screws everywhere I possibly could. On the decking itself, I used the camo system, not sponsored, it's just what I used, which runs the screws in on the sides. So you really don't see a bunch of decking screws as you're walking across. So I like that. It's really pretty. Hopefully that holds up over time. And even the deck railings, my finger here, I don't know if you can tell, but there are no screws showing. So I did all of those attaching from underneath. And I just think that's a cleaner look. It's, again, a little extra work, but it looks really great. I did use screws, and I found it really handy to have 2 drills ready to go at any given time. A battery dies or chuck breaks, whatever. One of them was an impact drill, which you had to use in certain instances. I did watch a lot of YouTube videos before I even bought any lumber, and those were super helpful. Dr. Dex, I think, was the one I watched the most of and found really handy. Took a lot of his advice, but educating myself before the fact was really helpful. And my steps were, first, I watched general videos where you see these 10, 20-minute videos, start to finish. That's a really good way to get an overview and understand the process, but it doesn't really tell you the details of how to build a deck. So once I was through that, I watched videos on each piece, like the ledger board. So I watched videos on how to put the ledger board up, which is one of the first things you have to do. And then videos on the best way to dig your posts out and fill those in and watch those. So each step of the way, I would watch videos about the step I'm on and the step that I'm getting ready to do. And that was just a huge difference maker. And those specialized videos tend to be a lot shorter. One way I moved things along, while I was able to move things along, is I turned it into my job. Every day, my job was to spend at least 2 hours, if not 4 hours, just working on the deck. And every day I got up, whether I felt like it or not, unless it was raining or something, I was out working on the deck. Because the excitement wears off, and you've got to keep something to keep yourself going to get the deck built. And even if it was just a little bit, it was a little bit that was done. And I kept going, and eventually we got to that result. One thing I could have done better was gotten more help. I had friends that were more than willing to pitch in, and I got it in my head that this was my job and I had to do it myself. I did get help in a couple areas, like pouring the concrete, which really, you can't do that by yourself. And placing the ledger board, or the header board, because it was two 2x12, 20-foot boards screwed together, weighed hundreds of pounds, and had to set in a notched post. So I was very thankful for the help to get that piece done. Otherwise, pretty much I cut every board, drove every screw, and that's cool, but it was a lot of extra work for wanting to come to that result. As far as the lumber goes, I had it all delivered at the same time. And now I'd have broken that up a little bit into 2, maybe 3 shipments. Those first boards, the ledger board, header board, posts in a shipment, then maybe the joists and the framing around the joists in the second shipment, and the decking boards, top rails, and things like that in the third shipment. For one thing, I paid for all of it right then, and it spent just months sitting in the yard, which killed a big section of grass. When you order it and have it delivered, there's a guy in the yard that's just taking the next board off and loading the truck. He doesn't care if there are too many knots in it. He's just got to get rid of the wood. And that worked okay for most of the wood, but the wood that you're looking at all the time, especially the decking boards, not so much. I had 30 some odd decking boards. I exchanged almost every single one of them, and I spent a couple hours in the yard one day going through it, picking boards that had the fewest possible knots, that were straight, they weren't bent, picking those boards out individually. I think ended up with a better result. One more thing on the lumber. I had the draftsman also give me a materials list. He was way off, way too many of some pieces, not nearly enough of others. I should have sat down with his drafted thing and said, okay, it's this many of this board, this many of this board, this many of this board. I ended up returning hundreds of dollars worth of connectors and different things too that didn't even apply to what I was doing. So he was really good at drafting something, not so good at figuring out the pieces that went into that. So there's that for what it's worth. If you're handy around the house and you've got some power tools, saws, and you've got levels and squares and probably a couple of power drills, you'll be fine. I ended up buying a few specialized tools like the camo screw attachment system. That's really specialized. I got a lever thing that helped me straighten the boards up and make sure they were nice and square when I was putting the decking down. Probably a few other things, but most of the tools you've probably already got if you're at this point. One tool I wish I'd had was a table saw, because ripping boards and cutting boards at a special angle is a whole lot easier with a table saw. So that's the one thing I wish I had. I've since bought a small tabletop one, almost a hobbyist version, but the build was done when I just found it at a garage sale at a price I couldn't refuse. So I picked that up. I slowed myself down a whole lot worrying about these minor little details that nobody's going to see. It's not going to affect the quality of the build. So I finally had to make myself keep moving along because something would be some tiny fraction of an inch less than perfect. If you're a perfectionist, don't be a perfectionist. Just go for more or less excellent and you'll be fine. The tolerances in construction are a whole lot different than the tolerances in building furniture. Which, by the way, is my next project. I'm going to build some furniture for this deck. Part of that perfectionist thing is letting myself be intimidated by different parts of the job. Frankly, tying these stairs in, this was massively complicated. And even the city engineer, when he came out to do the first inspection, like, how are you going to do that? And I'm like, I'm not positive, but this is my general idea. And he just went, all right, we'll see. And as a matter of fact, no part of this deck is screwed to that deck. They abut to each other, but they're not attached. And for better or worse, I did that partly because I didn't want to create a situation where the city could say, oh, okay, now you're extending this deck. Now this old deck's got to meet new code, which it doesn't. I'm sure it met code when it was built. It's well built, it's sturdy, but there are some parts of it that I'm quite sure don't meet the code in place today. That was maybe made up in my head, but these are two completely separate decks that just happen to be butt up against each other. But I let myself get in my head sometimes and would stop working. Sometimes I'd figure things out because I stopped working. Make some progress every day you possibly can, and you'll find you get the job done. But also accept that life gets in the way, and let life get in the way, and then get back to your project as soon as you can. And that leads me to the biggest lesson that I've learned is that it can be done. Now, like I said, I am not a contractor or a carpenter or a tradesman in any way. Building something wasn't really in my wheelhouse. And if I can do it, I'm quite sure you can do it. Just take some perseverance, do your thinking and planning, over-plan, over-prepare. And when you get started, keep going. The biggest compliment that I got was from the city engineer that came in and signed off as he looked at it and he said, you could park a Jeep on this thing. I was like, well, I don't really plan to, but thank you. And again, everything was signed off with no corrections or no redos. So if you're really thinking about doing this, plan, prepare, get some professional drawings done, get a permit, and then take your time, but not too much time. Good luck. Feel free to reach out if you have a question. I don't consider myself an expert, just a soldier in the trenches that managed to get through this. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.